The NFL draft is literally this week. And though it's been draft season for a while, it just doesn't feel like it to me. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off, and it will cut off, unfortunately, does not mean that the journey's over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs wants to help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. FAMU has found their new men's basketball head coach. They went down the path that I thought they should go down, but they did not pick the coach I thought they should pick. We close out the show by looking at who I thought they should get and who they also did get to be their new head coach. But we kick it off with a two-part kind of analyzing the NFL draft season because this one just feels weird. This one just feels weird. And first and foremost, I want to know if you agree with that sentiment. Then again, it's so vague, maybe you don't understand what I mean. So in addition to telling me how you feel about the sentiment that this one just feels off, tell me how you feel about each of my reasons. I got 4 reasons on why this draft cycle just feels weird. And I'm sorry if you want me to come in here and try to pump up the NFL draft. I understand that it's draft week. It's been draft season for a while. I'm not here to do that today. The NFL draft cycle feels off, and it's not because things are so great. We have to be real. I'm here to keep it a bean with you. I'm not here to just hype you up. And one of the reasons that I think it feels weird is that the premier players are not exciting names. And this is no attack to them. Well, first off, let's define what I mean by premier, because I'm speaking on Willie Drew and Anim Dankwah. But why do I identify those two specifically as the 2 premier players in this draft class? Because I'm not necessarily sure that we'll see both of them get drafted. I think you probably see one, but I think both have a chance of not being selected in the NFL draft this year. So why do I call them the premier athletes? And maybe even saying that, maybe even saying they might not get drafted while also calling them premier is an indication of what the problem is with this draft class. And we'll get to that at the end. It's a culmination. You have to understand today is going to be a stream of consciousness episode, which means I'm just going to flow. And I'm going to say the thoughts as they come to my head. But when you look at Willie Drew and Anim Dankwah, I labeled them as the premier players because those are the 2 players who I think national scouts, media, they're putting in our faces the most. We know a lot of these players. You know Jarvion Howard, right? You know Mikey Victor. You know Sundiata Anderson. You know Isaiah Major. You know Davius Richard. And I think if Richard didn't get hurt, he would be also in this list of premier players. He would have a different justification. They are very much so pumping him up in the media. Meanwhile, Dankwah and Drew find themselves at premier events. There's 2 premier, and I mean no disrespect to anywhere else, but there's 2 premier pre-draft events in the NFL. And it's the Senior Bowl. That's the biggest of the big 3, but that is the biggest one that is the biggest one right there. The Senior Bowl and the NFL Scouting Combine. Dankwah found himself at the combine. He didn't go to the Senior Bowl, while Drew was at the Senior Bowl and he was at the combine. So those are our two ones. Those are number one, number two, however you want to phrase it. They might not be the best two prospects, but they are the two most premier players because those are the ones that are being placed on the pedestal. The problem with Willie Drew and Anim Dankwah, and this is not about their talents or anything like that. They are a D2 cornerback and an offensive tackle. I think a lot of people be faking the love for the D2, man. Be honest with you. I HBCU game day, for example. I look at their articles. You can see where the clicks at. It doesn't correlate to how people talk. I think people like to speak about D2s occasionally, but it doesn't get the conversation going. So for Willie Drew, him being a D2 cornerback kind of hurt the conversation from getting going because, yeah, he got the Senior Bowl invite, but he didn't really capitalize on that. That wasn't great from him. So he doesn't get the Senior Bowl bump that a Joshua Williams gets. Joshua Williams, being a D2 cornerback, got a lot of conversation, but that's because he went to the Senior Bowl and he did his thing against non-D2 talent, non-D2 opponents. I think that this plays a big part. And when you look at Dankwah, yeah, he's 6'8", a mammoth of a man. I think he's a fascinating prospect, but nobody wants to sit around and talk about offensive tackles. These two players, and this is no disrespect to Sundiata Anderson, Mikey Victor, who also got Shrine Bowl invitations. I just think that NFL scouts, NFL, whoever's making the decisions on who coming to the combine, who's going to the Senior Bowl, the Nagys of the world, those guys are saying, I identified Dankwah, I identified Drew. Those are the two that I want to bring over to the biggest event. Those are the ones who I feel like are the best selections, right? That's what I'm saying. And Davius Richard would have been another guy, but we'll get to him because his injury really screwed things up too. But that's at the top of segment 2. But one of the last things I said about Dankwah is as an offensive tackle, they just don't want to talk about him. And that's the truth. I think that players play a part, but then also just how people are not speaking about the event. This is reason number 2. Where is the baseline intrigue for the NFL draft this year? Where is it? Where is the baseline intrigue for the NFL draft? Does nobody want to know how many HBCU players are going to get drafted? Did Isaiah Bowden being the only one last year really kind of bring us down? Do we no longer care? I don't know, because when it was 0, we were still up in arms. Are we tired of having the same redundant conversation about, well, can we have more HBCU players drafted after the draft? Maybe we just are already setting ourselves up to not be disappointed. See, when you think about being disappointed, it's like, okay, well, I expected that to a degree. Temper your expectations. Okay. Nobody wants to know when the first HBCU player is going to be drafted. Like these are basic conversation starters. I'm not taking myself out of it. Look at me. I haven't been having these conversations either. So I can't, I'm thinking it, but there's just been so many more other stories that are more interesting. Basketball, out of season basketball topics have been more interesting and more desirable to discuss than the NFL draft. And NFL is king. Football is king. But I don't see these breakdown for the prospects as much. I don't. Not as much as I did in past seasons. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is, but I think that is something that is truly fascinating. Let me rattle off some of the stories. And believe me, this is draft week, so I'm sure you'll see a ramp up of draft coverage, but usually you see it a month at least in. These are things that I've heard more than the NFL draft. Don Thornton leaving UAPB, various baseball victories, the transfer portal, both in football and in basketball. I've seen those be discussed more. I've heard more about Bethune-Cookman not having a pro day than other people having a pro day in a lead up to the NFL draft. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the players. Maybe it's the disappointment of past seasons. Whatever the case is, I do not hear people speak about Dankwah, Drew, Anderson, Victor. Richard still gets a little bit of love, but he was injured, so you know why they're not talking about him too much until the most recent update on his health. But I just named a bunch of high-level talent on the HBCU level, and I do not hear those players get discussed. That's one of the reasons that this draft cycle feels off, because nobody wants to talk about it. But as we push forward, there's reasons for that. There's reasons for that. I've named some of the reasons that this just feels weird, but how about the reasons people aren't talking as we continue with Locked On HBCU? Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And if you're a small business owner who is not using LinkedIn, please contact me at South Exclusives to explain to me why you wouldn't be using this platform, because it is made for you. It is made for you to be able to find your small business voids and fill them with the right people for your team. I just packed on my LinkedIn. All right. So if somebody ain't there with a media company, I'll let you. But anyway, in seriousness, you have a void in your team. You need to be filled. 86% of small businesses who use LinkedIn find the right person for their job within 24 hours. You can vet the person. You can understand what they're all about without having to bring them in and talk to them first. So go ahead and go to linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege, and go ahead and find the right person for your team today. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL mock draft. If you missed last week's coverage live because they did a whole live stream of the first or the 1 through 6 episodes, that's okay because they're on demand essentially. Just go to Locked On NFL Draft and you'll be able to find the entire mock draft broken up into 6 different episodes for round 1. We've broken down some of the reasons why it feels off. Let's go even further, because Davius Richard's injury is a big reason on why this NFL draft cycle feels weird. I don't know a better word to describe it. Off, weird, like it's mundane almost, right? Like it's boring. It's just boring. I don't even say it's boring. It just hasn't been discussed. And I broke down some of the reasons on why that is, but let's continue, because Davius Richard's injury, in my opinion, sucked the energy out of everything, right? Like last week, I spoke about Richard's health, and he just got an update that he should be ready for the NFL draft, or excuse me, the training camps. I didn't hear too much chatter about that. And I don't think that my timeline all of a sudden just warped in this people don't pop up no more. I don't hear as much of this. Maybe it is what it is. Maybe my timeline is just catered to something else now. Maybe because football has been out of season. I don't know. I see my girl Yard Talk. You know what I'm saying? I see her all the time. You know what I'm saying? She told me, I found out from her that Quay Davis apparently is going to go to Grambling and not FAMU. So I'm seeing topics. I'm seeing people. But I'm not hearing the NFL draft be discussed that much. And for me, that I want to call it concerning so bad, but I understand. Back to Davius Richard, though. Davius Richard's update on his health was a great boost for him, and I think that it helps his draft stock. However, we've had to deal with his injury for about 2 months now, almost 2 months since he hurt himself. That really drained the energy, because when he went down, you could feel the energy deflate out of the arena. But I had no idea that that deflation was going to carry over into the rest of the NFL draft. There was a lot riding on the back of Davius Richard. There was a lot of expectation. There was a lot of curiosity. There was a lot of wonder. But once he left, I think we were like, oh, well, he's not going to get drafted because he's injured. You know, we're not going to see him at his pro day throw the ball any further. Like, we're not going to see these things. Go ahead and wrap it up for him. And he was the one player that everybody wanted to know. He's the biggest name. He is the premier player in this draft class. When I said he had a different set of qualifications, it's because, one, he's a quarterback. That's where a lot of the intrigue came from. Can he break the drought? So, one, he's a quarterback. And two, you see the media. I think it wasn't Path to the Draft, but he was on NFL Network with Steve White. And they interviewed him. And they're talking to him. Tom Pelissero broke the news that his health was better. Like, this is a guy who is treated like a big deal even though he wasn't invited to the Combine or the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl, like he didn't get those invites. Surprisingly enough, I would have loved to see him at the Shrine Bowl. That would have been crazy for me. But whatever, it is what it is. But the thing is, he got injured, and once he went down, the biggest conversation starter was removed from the conversation. And when I say people aren't talking, man, I'm not trying to sound holier than thou. Like, I'm not trying to put myself on some pedestal that I'm doing what other people ain't doing. Why aren't y'all rolling with me? This is, I think, the second draft topic we've had all of 2024. I don't think that I've maybe third. Like, legitimately, I haven't found the desire to talk about it. I found multiple other topics more interesting. I texted Gerald Huggins. He'll be on the show this week. I said, hey, man, we got to do something. It's the draft is this week. We got to do something, bro. Like, y'all know every year we're going to have Gerald Huggins. As long as we are both available to do this at some point in the draft cycle, he will be on Locked On HBCU. I can promise you that. But this year, we got all the way down to draft week without him coming on the show. It was strange. It was strange. These are just things that are indicative of it. So anyway, now the last one, and it's the culmination of all the three reasons before it. In general, this does not feel like it's going to be a successful draft. I think the one thing that could really take it over the edge is if Davius Richard gets drafted. If Richard is the only HBCU player to get drafted, it will feel like 3 HBCU players got drafted. That's because he's breaking a drought of a long time, what feels like an eternity of HBCU players, specifically HBCU quarterbacks, being drafted. If Davius Richard gets drafted, I think then it'll feel like a successful draft, no matter what else happens. But if he doesn't get drafted, now let's get to a more, what I feel like is, if he doesn't get drafted, let's get to what is a more realistic marker of success. One player getting drafted should not signify success. Are we going to see 3 HBCU players drafted? I don't know. I legitimately don't know. I go into this year and I don't feel confident that anyone gets drafted. I think we will see someone, if not a couple players, get drafted. But I can't point my finger for sure and say that's the guy. I don't know. Who is that guy? Is it Victor? I don't know. I think he could get drafted, but not betting the house on it. I'm not confident. Dankwah, not confident. I think it can be. Drew, not confident. Confidence wanes by the day, but I'm not sure. Richard, I think so, but I'm not confident. Like, I think he can, but I'm not confident. All these things come into play. Like there's players out there. There's talent. It's not about the talent. It just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like people are set up to win. Sunday Anderson, that's the other guy I knew. I forgot. Like, I think he can get drafted. I think these 5 players are in the mix. But I don't feel confident about anybody. So, of those 5 players on the board, realistically, could you get 2 or 3? Maybe. Is that enough to keep you satisfied? I don't know. What's the marker? Does anybody care? Does anybody care to define the marker? It feels weird. That's not, the marker is not one that's typically defined. But if I ask somebody, what's a successful draft from this year? I don't know. Who your favorite prospects? Like what? It's just too much uncertainty. That's the moral of the story. You can't convince me, though. You just can't convince me that this draft will give you the amount of satisfactory players or the amount of players that will be satisfactory. I'm not convinced of that. I'm not. I'll wait till it happens, and I hope that it will. And I hate to be such a Debbie Downer. I hate to be, a party pooper and whatnot, but it don't really feel like anybody's throwing a party anyway. So I would love to be the one who throws it, but I'll have to wait until after the draft. We'll see, though. This draft cycle feels weird. I broke down 4 reasons. In general, doesn't feel like it's going to be a successful draft. When Davius Richard got injured at the HBCU Legacy Bowl, the premier HBCU pre-draft event, it deflated the crowd and it deflated the topic. Prior to that, though, the NFL Combine. The NFL Combine, Drew, Dankwah, those players don't generate as much conversation. Great players, talented players, but conversation, they don't create that. And also, people aren't even talking about the draft in general. Doesn't feel like they have that baseline curiosity. But don't worry, we'll be here going on the draft. Thursday, Friday, got G on here. So I can't wait for that. That's the most exciting draft topic that we'll have this week. But move forward. Let's move off of the draft for a little bit. Let's get into the FAMU men's basketball landscape because they hit the NAIA field, but they didn't go get the guy that I thought that they should have got. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. And now, whether it's the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, whether you want to get into whatever you want to, maybe it's the NFL draft, right? I looked at some of the odds this morning, and you have Jaden Daniels is the current betting favorite to be picked by the Washington Commanders at number 2. And then obviously Drake May then falls to become the betting favorite at number 3 to the New England Patriots. I don't think I need to say Caleb Williams and where he's the favorite to go. But those are the things that you have to look at. The NFL draft has things such as who goes 1 through 10. Who's going to be the first player at each position to go. These are all beautiful options for you to capitalize and make a little bit of money off of at FanDuel.com/lockedon. So whether you choose the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, the MLB regular season, or the NFL draft, because we have so many sports with action right now, no matter what you put down money, no matter what you put money down on, you get $150 back in bonus bets if you are a new customer, win or lose. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Now, making all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Now, let's move on from the NFL draft. Let's get into something different, like men's basketball. I was going to say a little bit more positive, but you may not agree with that because I'm a little bit critical still because I think that FAMU should have selected Chris Wright instead. They went with Patrick Crarey as their new men's basketball head coach. Absolutely nothing wrong with Crarey. This is just me wishing to be right. This is just me feeling like they should have got the guy I said they should have got, right? Like it wasn't even on some, I was right type of deal. I just think that was the guy I would have went and sought out, to be honest. After a month since not renewing Coach McCullum's contract, they've landed on St. Thomas University's head coach, Patrick Crarey. FAMU took the road that I wanted them to take, which is going down the NAIA path. I think that that's bold because you're jumping above Division II. When you go down and you get somebody from the NAIA level, you are jumping above Division II and putting them right into the mid-majors. So I think that that is a big deal. I think that that is kind of a leap of faith of sorts because you're going down 2 subdivisions instead of just 1. Instead of just going to get somebody on your subdivision that maybe isn't a head coach or has head coaching experience, but is now an assistant somewhere or just isn't coaching, right? Like there's a couple of options you could have chose, but you decided to go down to the NAIA level. I can't criticize that because it's what I suggested they do. I just wanted them to go get Langston's Chris Wright. I'm not in those rooms. I'm not having those conversations. Chris Wright could have said, hey, I want to stay at Langston. Or he could have said, I want this amount of money. Or maybe, fam, you just decided Patrick Crarey was the better option for them, right? Like, I just thought that Wright made the most sense. I just thought that him being in an HBCU, I just thought it was logical. But you know what? It's very rare that there's only one logical outcome in any situation. So to say that Chris Wright was the only coach who could succeed, I think is wrong. I think that is false. We'll see if Patrick Crarey can as well. And he comes over with his own reputation. He comes over with his own reputation. They went with a guy who has made it to the NAIA tournament over the last couple of years. He comes over from St. Thomas University, where he was the coach of the year in 2024 in the Sun Conference. That is his 3rd coach of the year, the first in that conference, though. This is a well-coached guy, or this is a well-coached guy. What was I trying to say there? This is a coach who has a reputation of building up talent. They've had double-digit all-conference players over the last 3 years while he was at St. Thomas University. They've also had 3 All-Americans while he's been there on the NAIA level, so that's the entire subdivision. They have success on a conference level and a national scale. Prior to going to St. Thomas, who made the NAIA tournament 2 times, or made it 2 out of the 3 years, and both were the last 2 years of his run. He has success at Washington Adventist University. 1, 2, 3, 4. You had a 5-year span where he missed the NCAA or the NAIA tournament one time, right? He made it 15, 16, 16, 17, 18, 19, 19, 20. Only time he missed it was 17, 18. Like, this is a coach who has had a high level of success. So I don't want you to think that I'm downing him. I think that this is a solid hire based off of his ability to get quick turnarounds, to get quick success. He was at WAU and he was the head coach and he was the athletic director. So that tells me he's responsible. That tells me he's comfortable with high levels of responsibility. I don't want to say he's responsible like he's about to date my daughter or something, but he's comfortable with juggling a lot. And he comes from the NAIA level, so the whole finance situation, it's not going to discourage him. He's going to get in there. He's going to put in work. Patrick Crarey, new FAMU head coach. We'll see what they can do. They had a pretty good run with Bridget Gordon last year. They had some success with her. So she came and did a pretty good job in her first year. So let's see if Crarey can do the same. But I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Speaking of new head coaches, we'll be looking at Texas, or why you want to say that so bad? Probably because I want TSU to get a hockey team, but Tennessee State has hired their hockey head coach. It's a big deal. It's the first HBCU hockey head coach. Let's break down that hire on tomorrow's episode. But in the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.